Awaken your spirit, chosen ones. Power doesn't announce itself. It waits until you're no longer watching. For a while now, you've been unusually quiet. Not loud on timelines, not explaining your moves, not rushing to prove anything. And what most people don't realize is that silence like that isn't absence, it's transition. History quietly backs this up. Studies on influence and leadership consistently show that people who reduce unnecessary communication are often perceived as more competent and more authoritative over time. Not because they're trying to look powerful, but because restraint reads as control. Noise begs for attention. Control doesn't. Here's the uncomfortable part. When you went quiet, people didn't relax. They became alert. Some felt uneasy, others suddenly became curious, and a few started watching you much more closely than before. That's not coincidence. Human beings are wired to notice shifts in behavior, especially when someone stops playing a familiar role. You were predictable once, accessible, easy to read, and then something changed. What really unsettled them wasn't your silence itself. It was what your silence suggested. Growth usually makes noise at the beginner stage, but real growth gets quiet. It becomes focused, private, even boring to explain. While others were busy announcing every step, you stepped back and actually did the work. No updates, no disclaimers, no motivational captions, just progress happening off camera. And let's be honest, nothing confuses people more than someone who doesn't overshare anymore. You used to talk. Now you observe. You used to react. Now you pause. You used to be easy to categorize. Now you don't fit neatly anywhere, and that makes people uncomfortable in ways they can't explain without sounding insecure. There's a bit of humor in this too. The same people who once ignored you are now randomly checking your page, asking subtle questions, and pretending they're just being friendly. Suddenly, you're interesting again. And you didn't change your volume at all. You didn't become louder. You became solid. And now they're realizing the quiet wasn't weakness. It was a recalibration. Number 1. You stopped explaining yourself, and that terrified people. For years, you were the one who felt the need to justify every move, to clarify every thought, and to make sure everyone around you understood exactly what you were doing and why. You explained yourself so much that people started to take it for granted, assuming they had a right to your reasoning, as if your choices were public property. But something shifted. You realized that explanations are often a trap. The more you justify, the more people feel entitled to argue, manipulate, or control your narrative. So you stopped. Stopping wasn't just silence. It was a declaration. It told everyone around you that your life isn't a debate club and that your decisions don't require an audience. When you stopped explaining, people who were used to predicting you suddenly felt off balance. They had relied on your explanations to feel superior, to find loopholes, or to subtly question your authority. Without that safety net, they were forced to confront the reality that you are a person who operates on your own terms, not someone who bends to their interpretations or seeks their approval. This change isn't obvious to everyone, but it works like a ripple in water. At first, it's unsettling. Then it becomes alarming. People start noticing patterns in what you do, but they can't influence them the way they used to. Your silence is no longer emptiness. It's a shield, a boundary, and a statement all at once. And because human nature is uncomfortable with uncertainty, they project fear, frustration, and even suspicion onto you. They wonder why you don't feel the need to explain, and in that wondering, they begin to realize the subtle power you've always had but never flaunted. This shift doesn't make you loud or aggressive. It makes you untouchable in a way that noise never could. People begin to respect the invisible line you've drawn, even if they never admit it. And in that quiet, the ones who doubted or underestimated you, feel the first pangs of realization that you are not to be messed with and that your choices belong only to you. Your silence has become a force, and it terrifies those who once thrived on your words. Number 2. Your absence from noise forced others to confront their own emptiness. When you stepped back from all the chaos, from the constant chatter and the relentless need to respond to every little thing, you created a void. At first, people probably didn't notice. They assumed you were just busy or distracted, someone who would return to the usual noise at any moment. But as days and weeks passed, your absence became more than noticeable. Suddenly, spaces that were once filled with your energy felt empty, and that emptiness wasn't just physical. It was psychological. People who had relied on your reactions, your engagement, or even your validation began to feel uncomfortable in ways they couldn't explain. The truth is, most people surround themselves with noise to avoid facing themselves. They talk, they comment, they perform, not because they need to, but because silence forces reflection, and reflection is uncomfortable. Your withdrawal made them stop. Your absence was like a mirror they couldn't avoid, and in that mirror they began to see not only who they were, but how shallow their interactions had become. The emptiness wasn't something you created. It was already there, but your quiet exposed it. What's extraordinary is how subtle this shift is. You didn't confront anyone directly. You didn't lecture or argue. You simply became unavailable to their usual attempts at control, distraction, or drama. And the impact was instantaneous. People who thrived on the noise of others' lives started scrambling. They realized their world was not as full as they had assumed. That discomfort, that creeping awareness, is exactly what makes your absence so powerful. In stepping away, you didn't just remove yourself, you forced others to deal with a truth they had been ignoring. They were confronted with their own patterns, their own insecurities, and the hollowness of depending on others for meaning. And while some will panic, some will try to fill the void, a rare few will wake up to the fact that silence, focus, and self-possession are far more commanding than endless noise. Your absence didn't just change how people see you, it changed how they see themselves, and that realization is unsettling, unforgettable, and quietly devastating. Number 3. You learned that access is power, not attention. For a long time, you believed being seen, being talked about, or constantly interacting with everyone was the way to maintain influence. You thought that attention equaled authority, that if people noticed you enough, they would respect you or follow your lead. But over time, you discovered a truth that shifts everything. Influence doesn't come from being everywhere. It comes from being selectively available. Access is the real currency. When you limit who can reach you, who can influence you, and who gets a seat in your life, you create value simply by existing. Suddenly, people begin to realize that your presence is not guaranteed, and that scarcity makes them pay attention differently. This realization changes how the world interacts with you. People who once felt entitled to your time, your explanations, or your energy start feeling that they need permission just to enter your space. That subtle shift is more powerful than any loud declaration. It forces others to acknowledge that you operate on your own terms, and that their access is conditional, not automatic. The very people who once took your attention for granted now approach interactions with caution and respect, because they sense that they can't manipulate or overstep without consequence. Power in this form is quiet but absolute. You no longer need to prove yourself or justify your choices. Your decisions and boundaries become statements in themselves. And because most people have grown accustomed to constant availability, texts, calls, posts, reactions, your strategic absence creates tension, curiosity, and admiration all at once. What's extraordinary is how it affects perception. Those who once assumed control over your attention now question their own worth, their own timing, and their own approach. They begin to recognize that influence isn't a loud performance, it's a deliberate positioning. By understanding that access is power, you reclaim control over your life, your energy, and your outcomes. And the ones around you, who are suddenly aware that access isn't granted but earned, start treating you differently. Respect replaces expectation, and that subtle, unseen shift makes you untouchable in ways attention alone never could. Number 4, you outgrew reacting, and that removed their leverage. For a long time, your reactions were predictable. You responded to criticism, to gossip, to challenges, and even to subtle manipulations in ways that people could anticipate. That predictability gave them leverage over you. They knew exactly how to push your buttons, how to bait you, how to steer your emotions in directions that benefited them. Every reaction you gave was like handing them the keys to your energy, and for years they used those keys without hesitation. But then something changed. You stopped reacting. Outgrowing reactions isn't about becoming cold or emotionless. It's about refusing to hand over your power. You realized that every time you responded impulsively, you gave someone else control over your day, your mood, and sometimes your decisions. When you stopped feeding into their expectations, their influence over you evaporated. What once worked, the teasing, the criticism, the manipulation, lost its effect entirely because you no longer played by their rules. Your silence, your patience, and your measured actions became a shield, and that shift unsettled people in ways they hadn't anticipated. The brilliance of this is subtle but devastating. People who thrived on chaos, drama, or your emotional responses suddenly found themselves disoriented. They tried their usual tactics, but the responses they counted on never came. And because humans are wired to resist uncertainty, that lack of reaction forced them to reassess their approach. They couldn't manipulate or provoke you anymore, and the realization that you had removed their leverage created a quiet panic. Outgrowing reaction also gave you freedom. You began to act from intention instead of impulse. Decisions became deliberate, communication became selective, and your energy became yours alone. Those who tried to push you around were forced to recognize that you were no longer accessible to their games. In the absence of reaction, your power became invisible but undeniable. You didn't need to assert it loudly. Your composure, your consistency, and your refusal to engage on their terms did the work for you. By removing their leverage, you didn't just protect yourself. You reshaped how people could interact with you entirely, making it clear that you were no longer someone they could control. Number 5, you no longer seek validation, and that broke old hierarchies. For the longest time, you measured yourself by the approval of others. Likes, comments, praise, recognition, it all mattered. You adjusted your actions, your words, and even your energy to fit into expectations that weren't yours. That constant need for validation created invisible hierarchies. People felt they had influence over you simply because you allowed them to define your worth. But at some point, you stopped. You stopped asking for confirmation, stopped waiting for nods of approval, and stopped shaping yourself around what others wanted to see. That single shift broke old power structures quietly, but completely. When you stopped seeking validation, people around you realized something unsettling. They no longer had leverage. They couldn't manipulate your feelings by offering or withholding praise. They couldn't feel superior by subtly pointing out flaws or comparing you to others. The old rules of control no longer applied because you had refused to play by them. Your worth became internal, grounded in your own assessment of yourself, and that independence is something most people instinctively fear. It's uncomfortable to witness someone who isn't swayed by opinions or social pressure because it exposes how much of our own energy is spent trying to fit into someone else's narrative. This change also reshaped relationships. People who were used to influencing you suddenly found themselves navigating a new dynamic. They had to respect boundaries they never had before. They couldn't rely on your validation to feel significant, and many didn't know how to cope with it. Some tried harder, others gave up, and a few finally recognized your autonomy and started engaging with genuine respect. The truth is, not seeking validation doesn't make you arrogant. It makes you untouchable in ways attention never could. It shows that your confidence is rooted, not performative. It makes your decisions yours alone, unshakable by public opinion or private judgment. That quiet, uncompromising self-possession dismantles old hierarchies naturally because it refuses to acknowledge them. In reclaiming your validation from others and anchoring it within yourself, you didn't just protect your energy. You reset the entire social equation, proving that true influence comes from self-respect, not applause. Number 6. You became unpredictable by becoming disciplined. Discipline doesn't look flashy. It doesn't announce itself on social media, and it certainly doesn't scream for attention. But it is the quiet engine that makes unpredictability possible. When you committed to doing what needed to be done, regardless of external approval, temptation, or distraction, you started building a power that couldn't be measured by words or appearances. People who once thought they knew you realized quickly that they no longer could. Your moves became calculated, intentional, and consistent, not in a rigid, boring way, but in a way that no longer followed their expectations or patterns. That's unpredictability with depth. Most people confuse chaos with being unpredictable. They react to circumstances, flip moods, and make impulsive decisions, which gives the illusion of spontaneity. You, however, became unpredictable because your actions were grounded in discipline, not in reaction. You show up when it matters, remain silent when it's strategic, and take steps that others can't anticipate because they assume you'll operate like everyone else. That gap between expectation and reality is uncomfortable for those who thrived on predicting your moves, and it's exactly what makes you untouchable. Discipline also created independence. You no longer rely on external validation or constant feedback to decide your next move. Your plans, your priorities, and your progress exist on your own timeline, untouched by the opinions or assumptions of others. And because people can't control or manipulate what they can't predict, your self-mastery becomes a source of quiet power. The beauty of this transformation is subtle but profound. Your unpredictability isn't about showing off. It's about aligning with your own rhythm and purpose, while everyone else is still trying to keep up with their assumptions. People notice it even if they can't articulate why. That tension, that sense of not knowing your next step, commands respect without a single word. By being disciplined, you didn't just change your habits, you rewired the way people perceive you. And in that rewiring, you became a force they can no longer anticipate, influence, or underestimate. Number 7. You stopped competing and started compounding. For years, you were caught in the trap of comparison, constantly measuring yourself against others, trying to outdo, outperform, or outshine them in ways that never really mattered. Competing can feel motivating at first, but it always carries a hidden cost. Your energy gets spent proving yourself to people who are too distracted to notice real value. At some point, you realized that chasing someone else's shadow was exhausting and pointless. You stopped competing, and instead you began compounding. You focused on building quietly, consistently, and intentionally. Every small skill, every lesson learned, every choice made with discipline started stacking on top of the last. Compounding is invisible, but its effects are unstoppable. Unlike competition, which is loud and temporary, compounding grows silently over time, creating momentum that nobody can take away. While others were busy proving themselves day after day, you were busy improving yourself, adding layers of capability, wisdom, and resilience that don't show in the moment, but become undeniable over time. People who underestimated your quiet approach started noticing results that couldn't be argued with, not because you tried to impress, but because the work itself spoke volumes. What's remarkable about compounding is how it shifts perception. Those who once tried to compete with you suddenly find themselves trailing. They see progress happening in ways they didn't anticipate, and it makes them realize that consistency beats noise, depth beats flash, and patience beats urgency. You stopped playing someone else's game and created a league of your own, and that transformation is both subtle and shattering. By abandoning competition, you freed yourself from distraction and ego-driven comparisons. Every action became an investment in your future rather than a performance for approval. The result is a quiet authority that doesn't need to prove anything. Your growth no longer relies on being noticed, but it cannot be ignored. The people who once measured themselves against you now struggle to catch up, because what you've been building accumulates exponentially, quietly, and relentlessly. Compounding turned your silence into a statement, your focus into a weapon, and your life into a force that moves forward while the world is still busy trying to keep score. Number 8. You let people misunderstand you on purpose. For a long time you felt the need to clarify, explain, and justify everything you did. You thought that if people truly understood your intentions, your choices, or your actions, they would respect you, support you, or at least leave you alone. But the truth is, some people don't want understanding. They want control. They want narratives they can manipulate, assumptions they can exploit, and explanations they can twist. At some point you realized that no amount of clarification changes that. So you stopped trying. You began letting people misunderstand you on purpose. Allowing misunderstanding is not about being careless or indifferent. It's a strategic move that liberates your energy and exposes the motives of others. When people misinterpret you, it reveals who is focused on truth and who is focused on narrative. Those invested in twisting reality quickly become visible, and those who matter, those aligned with authenticity and depth, rise to the surface naturally. By stepping back and allowing misinterpretation, you stop feeding the machines of gossip, manipulation, and expectation, and instead reclaim control over your life and your story. There's a quiet power in being misunderstood intentionally. It forces people to operate without leverage. They can no longer predict your moves based on your explanations, and their frustration becomes a reflection of their own insecurity and need for control. They realize that their assumptions and interpretations no longer shape your reality. You've created space to move freely, act deliberately, and grow without constant interference or judgment. Letting people misunderstand you also sharpens your boundaries. You no longer waste energy trying to make everyone see your side. And in that energy shift, you become untouchable. People who once relied on your explanations to feel superior or manipulate your choices are left powerless. Misunderstanding becomes a filter, separating attention that matters from attention that doesn't, and exposing who truly respects your space and autonomy. By choosing to let people misunderstand you, you transform what could be seen as vulnerability into a weapon of clarity and independence. You no longer chase approval or validation. You act on your terms, and your life, actions, and presence speak with a force that words could never match. In this quiet mastery, those who misread you are left behind, while your power continues to grow unseen, unchallenged, and unstoppable. Number 9. You detached from outcomes, and that made you dangerous. For a long time, you were tied to results. Every decision, every action, every effort carried the weight of expectation, your own and everyone else's. You measured success in terms of outcomes and allowed those outcomes to dictate your mood, your confidence, and your energy. That attachment made you predictable. People knew what would excite you, what would frustrate you, and how they could influence you by manipulating situations. But then you shifted. You detached from outcomes. You stopped letting the end result define your value or control your choices, and the effect was subtle at first, then undeniable. Detaching from outcomes doesn't mean carelessness or apathy. It means you act with clarity, discipline, and intention, without letting fear of failure or desire for approval dictate your moves. When you stopped obsessing over results, you became impossible to predict, impossible to manipulate, and increasingly unshakable. People around you, who once tried to steer your decisions or provoke reactions, suddenly realized their leverage had disappeared. Your focus was no longer on proving something to them or to yourself. It was on executing your process, refining your craft, and trusting that the results would follow naturally. This shift makes you dangerous, in a quiet, almost invisible way. When you operate without attachment, you make bolder moves because risk no longer feels threatening. You step into opportunities without hesitation, respond to challenges with calm precision, and make decisions that others avoid because fear of failure still controls them. Your energy becomes a force that cannot be bargained with, your presence a statement that you are untouchable by expectations, and your influence grows because it is grounded in self-mastery rather than external validation. People notice it even if they can't name it. They see someone who moves without fear, who acts without needing permission, and who cannot be shaken by outcomes that used to intimidate everyone else. That quiet confidence, born from detachment, forces respect, breeds influence, and shifts dynamics in ways that words or noise never could. By letting go of outcomes, you didn't just free yourself, you became a force that others instinctively recognize as unstoppable. Number 10. You no longer mirror energy, you set the temperature. For years you responded to the moods, opinions, and expectations of others. If someone was agitated, you reacted. If someone was excited, you matched their energy. That kind of mirroring made life predictable for everyone around you because they could always influence your state by projecting theirs. But then you changed. You stopped reflecting other people's energy and started controlling your own. You realized that true power isn't about matching the world. It's about creating the world you operate in. By setting the temperature instead of following it, you became the standard everyone else unconsciously measures themselves against. When you stopped mirroring, people felt it immediately. Those who were used to using emotion to manipulate or provoke you suddenly lost their tools. No longer could they rely on your reactions to feel in control. Your composure became a quiet assertion that your state is yours alone, not something up for negotiation or influence. That shift unsettled people because it forced them to interact with someone who is steady, intentional, and in command of their own presence. You became a force they couldn't predict or manage, and that alone changes the dynamic in every relationship, every space, and every conversation. Setting the temperature doesn't mean shutting off emotion. It means mastering it. It means choosing how you respond, when you respond, and whether you even respond at all. It means walking into a room or a situation and having your calm, focus, and energy dictate the flow, rather than letting external chaos dictate your mood. That kind of control is subtle, but undeniable. People notice, even if they can't articulate why it feels different. By refusing to mirror, you elevate yourself above manipulation, distraction, and reactive cycles. Your energy becomes contagious, but on your terms, not theirs. You're no longer a participant in the noise. You're the axis around which it rotates. In that quiet command, People begin to respect boundaries they never noticed before, take you more seriously than they ever have, and realize that the one they once could influence is now untouchable. You set the temperature, and suddenly everyone else is forced to catch up. Number 11. You chose depth over familiarity. For a long time, life felt like a series of shallow interactions. People came and went, conversations skimmed the surface, and relationships existed more for convenience than substance. You participated because it was expected, because familiarity made things easy, and because blending in felt safer than standing out. But then you made a choice, a quiet, deliberate choice, to prioritize depth over familiarity. You stopped settling for surface-level connections and environments that only knew your past. You sought substance, challenge, and alignment with your vision, even if it meant leaving people, places, or patterns behind. That decision alone changes how the world sees you. Choosing depth over familiarity is not about isolation, it's about value. It means investing in what grows you rather than what comforts you. It means saying no to routine interactions that waste energy and yes to situations, conversations, and relationships that demand more of you and, in return, elevate you. The people who were used to taking your presence for granted, who relied on old patterns of comfort and predictability, suddenly found themselves confronted with your absence or your transformation. And in that absence they realized just how rare and untouchable depth is. Depth changes perception. Familiarity breeds expectation. Depth commands respect. When you engage with others now, it is intentional. Every word, every action, every gesture carries weight because it comes from a place of substance, not habit. People notice it even if they can't explain why they feel compelled to pay attention, to listen, or to adjust. Your presence becomes magnetic because it is scarce in the right way, not because it is loud, but because it is meaningful. Choosing depth also forces you to confront yourself honestly. You no longer rely on the comfort of old habits or familiar surroundings to define your worth. Instead, your life, your energy, and your progress are measured by the quality of engagement and growth you create. In doing so, you've shifted the balance of power. People who were accustomed to taking you for granted now realize that your focus is reserved for substance, not noise, and in that realization, they can no longer underestimate or manipulate you. Depth has made you selective, intentional, and ultimately untouchable. Number 12. You stopped announcing growth and started embodying it. For a long time, growth was something you felt pressured to broadcast. You posted updates, shared milestones, and explained progress in ways that invited approval, attention, or validation. It felt necessary to prove that you were moving forward, that you were improving, that you were on your way. But at some point, you realized that announcing growth rarely changes anything. People may applaud, comment, or nod, but that external acknowledgement doesn't make the growth real, nor does it make you untouchable. So you stopped. You let your work, your habits, and your results speak for themselves. You started embodying growth, not advertising it. Embodying growth is different. It's quiet, deliberate, and undeniable. Instead of talking about how far you've come, your actions, discipline, and results naturally show it. People notice subtle shifts, your confidence, your composure, your ability to handle situations that used to trip you up. Growth becomes a living, breathing part of you, and that is far more powerful than any announcement or display. It's impossible to argue with because it isn't performative. It's visible in how you carry yourself, how you respond to challenges, and how you interact with the world. When you embody growth, you also disrupt expectations. People who once tried to define or measure you based on outdated perceptions find themselves confronted with someone they no longer recognize. They may feel uneasy or intimidated, not because you're loud, but because you've moved past the point where they can influence or manipulate you. Your evolution is silent yet authoritative, and that quiet power is more commanding than any statement you could make. Embodying growth changes the dynamics of influence. You no longer rely on explanations, updates, or validation to assert your presence or worth. Instead, your progression becomes a force that others can't ignore. By living your growth rather than announcing it, you create an environment where respect is earned naturally, boundaries are clear without argument, and influence is inherent. You've shifted from performing for perception to existing in power, and in that shift, you've become untouchable. Growth is no longer something you claim. It is something you are. Number 13. You no longer rush to be understood by those committed to misunderstanding you. For years, you felt the weight of having to explain yourself to everyone around you. You believed that if people just knew your intentions, your reasoning, or your struggles, they would finally respect you, stop judging you, or align with your vision. But the truth is, some people aren't interested in understanding. They are only interested in confirming their own biases, controlling the narrative, or feeding their sense of superiority. At some point, you realize that trying to make those people see your perspective was a waste of energy, and that's when everything changed. When you stopped rushing to be understood, you reclaimed control. You no longer felt the need to justify every action, defend every decision, or clarify every word. People who were used to manipulating your explanations suddenly found themselves powerless because you no longer handed them the tools to do so. Your silence, patience, and focus became a statement far louder than any argument could ever be. Those committed to misunderstanding you were left frustrated and exposed, realizing that your actions didn't need their approval to hold weight. This shift also gave you freedom. You no longer bend your energy toward persuasion or validation. Every word you speak, every action you take, is intentional and grounded in your priorities, not in the expectation that someone else will finally get it. You act from clarity, not desperation. That kind of self-possession is rare, and it makes you untouchable in ways that reaction, explanation, or justification never could. People notice the difference, even if they can't articulate why. There's a calm confidence in someone who refuses to be consumed by other people's misunderstanding. It disrupts assumptions, forces respect, and sets new boundaries without a single word being wasted on arguments. By walking away from the need to be understood, you've created a space where your value is inherent, your actions are undeniable, and your power is unquestionable. The ones who once demanded explanations now see that your clarity doesn't need their consent, and that realization shifts the entire dynamic in your favor. Number 14. You didn't disappear, you repositioned. When people saw you step back, they assumed you were fading away. They thought your silence meant weakness, that your absence meant retreat, or that you were simply out of the game. But the truth is far deeper. You didn't disappear. You repositioned. Every pause, every withdrawal, every moment of quiet was a strategic move, a recalibration of your presence and your power. While others were busy assuming your retreat was a loss, you were quietly setting the stage for influence, authority, and respect on an entirely new level. Repositioning is about control. It's about taking the power of your presence seriously and realizing that being everywhere isn't the same as being effective. By stepping back, you removed yourself from distractions, noise, and people who thrived on predictability. That absence forced others to rethink their assumptions. Suddenly, they couldn't take you for granted. They realized that you weren't simply reacting to life or to them. You were moving on your own terms, in your own direction, with intention. And that shift in perception is far more powerful than any display of force could ever be. The beauty of repositioning lies in its subtlety. People feel it without fully understanding it. Your silence becomes meaningful, your focus becomes undeniable, and your actions carry weight because they are deliberate. The ones who underestimated you now struggle to anticipate your next move, and that uncertainty gives you power. You are no longer accessible in the ways they expect, and that inaccessibility commands attention, respect, and recalibration. By repositioning, you've turned what could have been seen as withdrawal into a demonstration of mastery. You've made your presence scarce in the right ways, your influence selective, and your growth undeniable. You didn't vanish, you evolved. And in that evolution, people are forced to recognize that your quiet wasn't absence, it was preparation. They see now that you are not to be underestimated, your energy is not to be taken lightly, and your return is not a coincidence. You repositioned, and in doing so, you became untouchable. The journey you've been on isn't about noise, attention, or fleeting displays of power. It's about reclaiming control, mastering your energy, and living in a way that commands respect without a single word being wasted. Every shift, stopping explanations, stepping back from noise, valuing access over attention, detaching from outcomes, embodying growth, refusing to mirror energy, choosing depth, and repositioning yourself, has built an unshakable foundation. What people once misunderstood as silence, absence, or retreat was never weakness. It was strategy, self-mastery, and evolution. You've transformed quietly but completely, creating a presence that can't be manipulated, underestimated, or ignored. Every action, every pause, and every boundary now communicates one undeniable truth. You operate on your own terms, and those terms are non-negotiable. This transformation isn't about proving anything to the world. It's about proving it to yourself. It's about living with clarity, purpose, and authority, and allowing the results to speak louder than any explanation ever could. The people around you may only realize the extent of your growth in retrospect, but that doesn't matter. What matters is that you have stepped into a new version of yourself, stronger, sharper, and untouchable. Every choice, every habit, and every boundary compounds to create a presence that is quietly, yet undeniably, formidable. Your journey is a reminder that true power isn't loud, it's deliberate, disciplined, and deeply rooted in self-possession. You've stopped playing by old rules, stopped chasing validation, and stopped explaining yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. You've evolved in ways they can't measure and can't anticipate. If this resonated with you, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next level of insights. Like, comment, and share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because the path to quiet power is meant to be seen, felt, and recognized.